In the quiet hours of medieval Europe, nights were alive with unseen activity. While most imagined darkness as a time for rest, the hours between first and second sleep were anything but idle. Servants tended fires, animals were watched, manuscripts copied, and whispers of superstition filled candlelit chambers. Dreams were consulted, spells recited, and vigilance maintained against threats both earthly and otherworldly. Across villages, castles, and cities, segmented sleep shaped daily life, blending labor, ritual, and survival in ways modern sleep cannot capture. Behind every closed door and shuttered window, human ingenuity and fear danced together, revealing a world where the night was both dangerous and indispensable, quiet yet intensely alive, and where every brief waking hour could hold purpose, mystery, or revelation. As dusk settled over a 14th century village in northern France in the winter of 1346, the streets emptied and the glow from hearths began to flicker through narrow windows. Daylight had dwindled by late afternoon, and households relied on the limited light of rushlights or tallow candles to carry on with domestic chores. In rural cottages, stone or timber walls absorbed the cold that crept through small windows and gaps in doors, leaving only the hearth as a source of warmth. In towns such as Amiens or Rouen, the bustle of markets and workshops gave way to quiet streets, interrupted only by the occasional passerby or watchman. Across these varied settlements, people were compelled to organize their lives according to the natural cycle of light and darkness, a reality that shaped when they slept, worked, and maintained the household. Evidence from English villages like those recorded in the 1,330 seconds in the county of Kent shows that families typically went to bed shortly after nightfall, with meals concluded around the dim glow of a central fire. Large manor houses or castles, such as Windsor Castle in Berkshire or Château de Coucy in Picardy, followed similar rhythms, although the scale and complexity of these households introduced additional considerations. Servants, guards, and laborers moved between hallways, kitchens, and storage areas, often using candles or lanterns sparingly, both because of cost and the fire hazard associated with open flames in wooden structures. Candle stockpiles were minimal, and a typical household might ration 1 or 2 per night for essential activity, relying on the hearth for most light. Winter darkness could last for up to 14 hours in northern latitudes, forcing inhabitants to adapt to extended periods of low visibility. In response, households structured sleep in 2 segments: an initial period, referred to in contemporary chronicles as the first sleep, followed by a period of quiet wakefulness, and then a second sleep before sunrise. The division of the night allowed families to conserve fuel, tend fires, check on livestock, or perform small tasks without requiring continuous illumination or exposing themselves to drafts. Records from monasteries in Picardy and Normandy, including accounts from Saint Denis in 1362 to 1363, indicate that monks similarly observed segmented sleeping patterns, rising briefly between hours of night prayer and rest. Domestic activity during the night was influenced not only by light and warmth, but also by the physical limitations of homes and castles. In smaller peasant cottages, multiple family members often shared a single room with straw-stuffed mattresses placed near the hearth, while upper chambers in castles remained cold until central fires were replenished. The positioning of beds, proximity to heat sources, and thickness of bedding played a critical role in determining comfort and the need to awaken during the night. Household inventories from northern English manors, such as those in Yorkshire from 1350 to 1351, list blankets, furs, and rushes used specifically to maintain warmth during long winter nights. Candle scarcity, extended darkness, and frigid interiors combined to make continuous sleep difficult, reinforcing the segmented pattern. Observers from the late 14th century, including French chroniclers, note that first sleep often lasted 3 to 4 hours, after which individuals might rise to check the fire, pray, engage in conversation, or tend to nocturnal chores before returning to bed for a second sleep of similar length. These nocturnal intervals were socially accepted and considered routine rather than a disruption. In towns, markets, and manor records, Mentions of nighttime activity suggest that people moved quietly through spaces without disturbing others, using minimal light and performing tasks in a deliberate, measured manner. By the mid-1300 seconds, the combination of environmental conditions, lighting limitations, and domestic routines created a natural rhythm that structured daily life around segmented sleep. People of all social strata, from peasants in Kent to nobles at Windsor, relied on this pattern to balance warmth, light, and safety. The night was not entirely for rest, but became a period of practical activity, reflection, and adaptation, a necessary response to the constraints imposed by medieval architecture, climate, and material resources. The rhythm of the evening dusk to first sleep, interlude of quiet wakefulness, and second sleep shaped not only the hours of rest, but also the organization of the household and the routines of the medieval year. Medieval architecture shaped daily life in ways that extended even into the night, influencing how and when people slept. In the 14th century, castles, manor houses, and peasant cottages were constructed primarily for defense, storage, and practicality, rather than comfort or insulation. Stone walls, timber beams, and narrow windows created interiors that were drafty and often cold, especially during winter months. In castles such as Windsor and Berkshire or Scottish tower houses along the northern borders, upper chambers could remain frigid despite a central hearth or braziers in the lower floors. The location of rooms, the thickness of walls, and the arrangement of furniture all affected thermal comfort, prompting medieval inhabitants to adapt their sleeping patterns accordingly. In peasant cottages, multiple family members often shared a single room, sleeping on rush-strewn floors or simple straw-stuffed mattresses. The walls were thin and often unplastered, allowing cold air to seep through gaps in timber frames. Windows were small and shuttered, admitting minimal light, while the central hearth provided heat primarily to the area immediately around it. Beds or sleeping platforms were placed strategically near the fire, often against interior walls, and rushes or straw were layered across floors to reduce chill. The limited warmth meant that people typically went to bed early, waking during the night either due to cold or the need to maintain household tasks. Larger noble residences, including manorial halls and castles, introduced more complex considerations. In Windsor Castle, for example, chambers located above the Great Hall could benefit indirectly from the heat rising from the central hearth, but the effect was uneven. Stone floors and high ceilings caused significant heat loss, leaving bedrooms at the periphery of comfort. Beds were often raised on wooden platforms, with heavy curtains or tapestries surrounding them to conserve body heat. Canopy beds were more than decoration. They trapped warmth around the sleeper, a crucial adaptation in rooms exposed to drafts from arrow slits, external walls, or high windows. The architecture of sleeping spaces also reflected social hierarchy. Nobility enjoyed insulated chambers, often with fireplaces or chimneys in the later 14th century, while servants and lower-ranking household members slept in corridors, garderobes, or smaller rooms adjacent to kitchens and halls. Scottish tower houses illustrate this arrangement. Upper floors were reserved for the lord and family, with rudimentary sleeping spaces for retainers on the lower levels, sometimes close to the kitchen hearth, to benefit from residual warmth. In manor inventories, references to rushes, furs, and blankets indicate deliberate planning for thermal comfort according to social status. Shared rooms in both castles and cottages required careful spatial organization. Beds, or sleeping platforms, were arranged to maximize the warmth available from the hearth or braziers. In many cases, family members or retainers slept in shifts, a practice that coincided with segmented sleep patterns. Narrow staircases and internal corridors were used sparingly at night to prevent heat loss, while interior doors, heavy curtains, and wooden screens were employed to block drafts and channel warmth. Records from French manorial estates in Picardy during the 1350 seconds describe portable screens and layered rushes being used strategically to insulate sleeping quarters from cold external walls. Even in smaller urban dwellings, the basic principles applied. Houses in London and provincial towns had upper chambers reached by steep stairs, where inhabitants slept in proximity to the heat of the lower floors. Hearth placement, room orientation, and the thickness of stone or wattle and daub walls directly affected how long and comfortably people could remain asleep. The architectural limitations of medieval buildings, combined with practical adaptations such as raised platforms, heavy curtains, and rush-covered floors, directly shaped the timing, duration, and segmentation of sleep throughout the medieval world. By examining the interplay between structure, material, and human adaptation, it becomes clear that the design of medieval buildings dictated much of the household's nocturnal behavior. Cold interiors, drafty walls, and limited light forced people to develop sleeping patterns responsive to both environmental and social conditions. Bed placement, room selection, and shared sleeping arrangements all contributed to a rhythm of rest that accommodated the realities of medieval architecture, influencing not only comfort, but also the timing of first and second sleep across Northern Europe. In the absence of modern lighting, medieval households relied on the limited illumination of candles, rushlights, and hearth fires, which directly influenced sleeping patterns and contributed to the practice of segmented sleep. During the 14th century, artificial light was expensive, labor-intensive, and relatively dim. Candle production required tallow or beeswax, both of which were costly commodities. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were common but burned unevenly and produced smoke and odor, while beeswax candles were reserved for the wealthier households and religious institutions. As a result, the timing of nocturnal activities was closely tied to the availability and duration of these light sources. In rural cottages, households typically relied on rushlights, made by soaking rushes in tallow and lighting them at one end. These provided a weak, flickering glow, sufficient for brief evening tasks such as mending clothing, tending animals, or preparing a small meal, but inadequate for prolonged work or reading. Hearth fires were central to daily routines, providing both light and warmth, though they were largely confined to the main hall or kitchen. The combination of dim light and limited heat meant that families often retired to bed soon after nightfall, only to awaken in the middle of the night when embers dwindled or the hearth required replenishment. Manorial estates and castles had more substantial lighting infrastructure, yet constraints persisted. In Windsor Castle during the late 13th century, household accounts record multiple cords of wood used to maintain fires and dozens of tallow candles consumed each week, indicating both the scale and the expense of illumination. French estates, such as Château de Coucy, maintained inventories of beeswax candles specifically for the lord's private chambers and chapel, while servants relied on tallow candles or minimal rushlights in corridors and smaller rooms. The need to conserve these materials dictated the timing of evening activities, encouraging early retirement and periodic waking during the night to replenish fires or relight candles. Night waking was not purely a matter of necessity, but also practicality. In monastic and clerical contexts, records from English and French abbeys describe nocturnal vigils, study, or prayer periods that corresponded with the diminishing availability of light. Even lay households adapted to this pattern. Once hearth fires died down or candles burned low, people would wake naturally, attend to household needs, check on animals, or perform chores that required minimal illumination. These interruptions coincided with what historians now identify as the first sleep and second sleep, with the limited reach of artificial light serving as a natural regulator of activity. Social status further affected access to light, and consequently, sleep patterns. Nobles could afford larger quantities of candles and maintain hearth fires for longer periods, allowing for extended evening activities such as reading, writing, or private conversation. Servants, peasants, and other lower status occupants had restricted access to illumination and often structured their sleep around the availability of heat and light in shared spaces. Manor accounts, such as those from Picardy estates in the 1350 seconds, show careful rationing of tallow and beeswax, emphasizing the interplay between resource management and domestic routines. The spatial arrangement of rooms also influenced nocturnal activity. Upper chambers in castles or townhouses were often removed from the main hearth, making them darker and colder. Candles or small braziers were employed sparingly to preserve both fuel and firewood, reinforcing segmented sleep practices. Additionally, narrow windows, heavy shutters, and thick stone or timber walls limited the penetration of natural moonlight or starlight, emphasizing the dependence on artificial sources. Even in urban homes with multiple stories, residents scheduled work and rest according to when illumination was available, creating a rhythm that accommodated the limits of medieval lighting. The combination of lighting constraints, fuel management, and room placement shaped household behavior across Northern Europe. From humble cottages to grand castles, the availability of candles and the heat of the hearth dictated when people retired to bed, when they awoke during the night, and how they allocated tasks and responsibilities in darkness. In this way, the medieval reliance on modest light sources directly reinforced the segmented sleep pattern, illustrating how environmental and technological limitations structured nocturnal life. Medieval documentation provides the clearest evidence of two-shift sleep, demonstrating that segmented rest was a widespread and recognized practice across Europe. Accounts from diaries, chronicles, and medical treatises of the 13th and 14th centuries describe periods of first sleep and second sleep, with an interlude of wakefulness in between. French poet Jean de Meun, writing in the late 14th century, mentions household members rising after midnight for quiet activities before returning to bed, a practice corroborated by monastic records, parish registers, and even municipal ordinances in towns such as Rouen and Dijon. These sources indicate that waking after the initial sleep was neither accidental nor unusual. Rather, it formed a structured part of daily life and was observed consistently across regions and social classes. French monastic accounts from the Benedictine abbeys of Saint Denis and Cluny describe clergy rising from first sleep around midnight or shortly after, engaging in brief prayer, study, or copying manuscripts before resuming rest. English parish records, including those from villages near Cambridge, York, and Norwich in the early 1300s, note that householders and laborers rose between first and second sleep to check on animals, tend fires, or perform small chores. Even in urban environments, nocturnal activity was recognized. London parish accounts from 1310 to 1320 report watchmen patrolling streets after midnight, while other residents carried out necessary household tasks, suggesting that a collective pattern of segmented sleep structured the night across social strata, from peasants to artisans, minor officials, and clergy. Medical writings further confirm this rhythm. In the 14th century treatise Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, physicians advised patients to rise briefly during the night to aid digestion and promote balanced humors. Galenic theory emphasized the movement of bile and phlegm, and wakefulness between first and second sleep was sometimes recommended to maintain humoral equilibrium. Medical notes from English and French practitioners also observed that waking after the first sleep was common among healthy individuals, while those suffering from fevers, respiratory complaints, or digestive disorders were advised to maintain longer, uninterrupted rest. These observations reflect the integration of natural sleep rhythms into contemporary medical thought, showing that segmented sleep was both empirically observed and incorporated into prescriptive health guidance, recognized in both monastic and lay communities. Diaries and chronicles reveal additional practical reasons for segmented sleep. Villagers and rural households often divided the night to perform essential chores when moonlight or residual hearthlight allowed limited visibility. Livestock had to be fed, fires stoked, and food prepared for the following day. Manor records from northern England in 1325 to 1330 list household staff working in two phases, aligning with first and second sleep periods, while French records from Picardy indicate that servants rotated duties in accordance with nocturnal wakefulness. Even in noble households, chamber servants were expected to wake and manage fires, security, and candlelight, reflecting a systematic adaptation to nighttime conditions, and highlighting how labor and domestic schedules were structured around the natural rhythm of darkness and seasonal variation. Literary and legal sources also document nocturnal activity between sleep phases. Court records from Paris in 1370 reference witnesses testifying about household members seen moving about after first sleep, demonstrating the common acceptance of midnight waking. Chronicles of travelers in Scotland and northern England describe inns and manor houses where rooms were quiet for a few hours before residents returned to bed, a detail that underscores the habitual nature of segmented rest. Across Europe, these written accounts indicate that two-shift sleep was recognized socially, medically, and practically, spanning rural, urban, and ecclesiastical environments, and often influencing communal and private behavior alike. This historical documentation challenges modern assumptions about continuous sleep as the default human pattern. Evidence from diaries, parish records, monastic schedules, and medical texts consistently reports first and second sleep separated by a wakeful period. Rather than being a symptom of disturbance or deficiency, these interludes were integrated into the daily rhythm, serving both practical and health-related functions. The consistency of these accounts across centuries and regions demonstrates that segmented sleep was a deliberate, culturally endorsed pattern, shaped by environmental constraints, labor demands, seasonal variation, and contemporary understandings of the human body, reflecting a complex medieval approach to rest, domestic routine, and nocturnal activity. In medieval Europe, religious practice deeply influenced daily rhythms, including the structure of sleep. Monastic schedules, parish obligations, and household devotion imposed patterns of nighttime activity that reinforced the segmented first sleep and second sleep rhythm. By the 13th and 14th centuries, canonical hours dictated precise periods of prayer, with vigils and matins requiring clergy and devout laity to rise from rest in the middle of the night. Benedictine abbeys, including Saint Denis near Paris, Reading Abbey in Berkshire, and Mont Saint-Michel off the Normandy coast, maintained detailed schedules that divided the night into periods for first sleep, nocturnal prayer, study, and second sleep, illustrating how religious obligations were interwoven with natural rest cycles and daily household routines. Evidence from monastic chronicles indicates that first sleep often concluded shortly after sunset plus a few hours, typically around 9:30 to 10 p.m. Clergy and novices then rose for vigils lasting 1 or 2 hours, sometimes longer during feast days, Lent, or particularly holy nights such as All Saints' Eve. Illuminated manuscripts and marginal notes from the early 14th century reveal precise instructions for nighttime devotion, including candle placement, sequence of psalms, and the timing of prayers, reflecting careful coordination between physical light and spiritual practice. Lay households frequently mirrored these schedules, with servants, apprentices, and children observing brief prayers or private reflection before returning to bed, demonstrating the pervasive influence of religious routines beyond the cloister and into ordinary life. Parish churches also shaped nocturnal activity. Parishioners often attended night services during major feast days or vigil nights, particularly during Christmas, Easter, and All Saints' Day. Records from York, Canterbury, and smaller villages in Norfolk between 1310 and 1,325 document congregants traveling from surrounding hamlets to join pre-dawn prayers, with some accounts noting return to household beds after a period of wakefulness. Candlelight, torches, and small oil lamps illuminated these nighttime movements, and some households coordinated their chores, animal care, and fire tending around these excursions, showing a practical alignment of piety and domestic life in both urban and rural settings. Religious calendars further dictated seasonal variation in nocturnal wakefulness. During longer winter nights, monasteries adjusted schedules so that first sleep ended later in the evening, while summer vigils began earlier to coincide with cooler, darker hours. Abbeys such as Cluny and Vézelay provided extensive guidance on sleep segmentation, instructing that brief periods of wakefulness could be used for silent prayer, study, or reflection on scriptural passages. Lay observers, particularly those in urban centers like Rouen, Dijon, or Paris, often followed similar rhythms, rising to read devotional texts, recite the hours, or perform small household duties while their children and staff maintained the warmth, security, and organization of the dwelling. Medical and spiritual texts intersected in advice regarding night waking. Some treatises, including the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, suggested that brief nocturnal activity could aid both bodily health and spiritual vigilance. Maintaining alignment with canonical hours was believed to harmonize the body's natural rhythms with divine order, promoting mental clarity, emotional balance, and physical well-being. Clerics and laypeople alike interpreted the period between first and second sleep as a spiritually favorable time for reflection, confession, or contemplation, reinforcing the regularity of segmented sleep as a culturally endorsed practice. Even aristocratic households adopted ritualized nighttime behavior. Steward records from Windsor Castle in 1325 to 1330 note chamber servants assisting with nocturnal prayers for noble family members, lighting candles, and attending to minor duties between sleep phases. French court documents from Château de Vincennes describe similar practices, where chamber staff coordinated evening devotions and night prayers in alignment with segmented sleep schedules. These examples illustrate that religious obligations structured not only monastic life, but also domestic and courtly routines, embedding two-shift sleep into both spiritual and social frameworks. Through monasteries, parish churches, and private devotion, religion shaped nocturnal activity in medieval Europe. Nighttime rituals, canonical hours, seasonal feasts, and holy observances provided formalized reasons to rise between first and second sleep, intertwining piety with practical management of household life. Across rural villages, urban parishes, and noble courts, faith and routine created a rhythm in which segmented sleep was a natural, socially reinforced pattern, blending spiritual obligation with the practical demands and environmental realities of nighttime living. In medieval households, the rhythms of work and rest were tightly intertwined, and the segmented pattern of first and second sleep reflected practical adaptation to labor demands. Villagers, manor residents, and castle households organized their nights to accommodate essential domestic and agricultural tasks, often rising briefly after the first sleep to tend to immediate needs. Evidence from inventories, steward accounts, and village records of the 13th and 14th centuries indicates that nocturnal activity was not exceptional but a routine component of household management, reflecting the complex interplay between environmental conditions, seasonal cycles, and social hierarchy. Livestock care was a primary driver of night waking. Animals, essential for food, labor, and income, required feeding, watering, and occasional medical attention during long winter nights. Records from northern English villages between 1315 and 1325 detail peasants checking stables, replenishing hay, and stoking small fires in barns to prevent freezing. In castle estates such as Windsor and Coucy, specialized servants, including grooms and herdsmen, maintained nighttime routines, rotating duties to ensure that animals remained healthy and secure. This nocturnal labor was closely coordinated with first and second sleep, demonstrating that segmented rest allowed households to extend productivity beyond daylight hours while preserving safety and comfort. Domestic chores followed a similar pattern. Household accounts from Picardy in the 1322 list staff attending to water collection, laundry, and food preparation in two phases, often coinciding with periods of wakefulness between first and second sleep. Kitchens, where fires were maintained for both cooking and warmth, required careful staffing, particularly during winter months. Chambermaids and scullery workers moved between tasks such as chopping wood, fetching water, and preparing ingredients while noble family members rested, showing a division of labor that utilized nocturnal hours efficiently without disturbing the sleeping elite. In smaller rural homes, similar activities occurred on a reduced scale, with families rotating responsibilities to manage both survival and household order. Steward records highlight the careful organization required to sustain these routines. At Windsor Castle between 1324 and 1326, logs indicate the timing of tasks for different servants, ensuring that essential duties such as fire maintenance, candle lighting, and security patrols were completed during the night. Medieval manuals, such as the 14th century Livre de la Cité des Dames, emphasize the importance of structured domestic schedules, recommending that certain chores be performed in the hours after first sleep, when cooler temperatures and quiet conditions facilitated uninterrupted work. These records demonstrate that nocturnal labor was not haphazard but deliberately synchronized with segmented sleep, to maximize efficiency and maintain household stability. Seasonal considerations also influence the timing of night labor. Longer winter nights required earlier bedtime and later rising, but colder temperatures made certain tasks more urgent, such as ensuring that water sources did not freeze and that fires remained alight in both kitchens and private chambers. In northern Scotland and Yorkshire, documents from 1320 to 1335 show that households adjusted rotations of nighttime labor according to frost, snow, and daylight hours, reflecting a practical awareness of environmental constraints. Rural laborers and castle servants alike incorporated these seasonal adaptations into the rhythm of segmented sleep, using the interlude between first and second sleep to manage work that could not wait until morning. The integration of night labor into daily life extended beyond immediate household needs. Craftsmen, scribes, and apprentices often used nocturnal hours to complete specialized tasks that required concentration and minimal interruption. Manuscript production in monastic scriptoriums, for example, frequently continued after first sleep, with candles or oil lamps providing focused light. Similarly, rural villagers might mend tools, prepare leather, or perform other precision work during the night, exploiting quiet and residual illumination from hearths or moonlight. Across social strata, the interlude between first and second sleep became a practical opportunity to balance labor, domestic management, and personal obligations within the constraints of medieval life. By structuring night labor around the natural rhythm of first and second sleep, medieval households demonstrated both flexibility and foresight. Segmented sleep allowed for continuity of essential tasks, protection of resources, and maintenance of domestic order, revealing a pattern of adaptation in which work, rest, and environmental awareness were intertwined. Nighttime activity was thus an integral element of household economy, reflecting practical decision-making that extended beyond survival to encompass efficiency, social organization, and the coordinated functioning of rural and aristocratic life alike. In medieval Europe, the changing seasons had a profound impact on daily life, particularly on patterns of sleep. Longer winter nights, shorter days, and bitterly cold temperatures forced villagers, castle residents, and urban households to adapt their routines, reinforcing the practice of segmented sleep. Evidence from northern England, Scotland, and Picardy between the 13th and 14th centuries shows that first and second sleep were not fixed in absolute time, but shifted according to seasonal conditions. Household records, monastic schedules, and steward accounts all reflect a practical understanding of the challenges posed by extended darkness and freezing temperatures, with sleep and activity closely coordinated to make the most of warmth, light, and labor. Even small adjustments, such as staggering household duties or shifting the timing of meals, were implemented to accommodate the extended nights of winter. During winter months, the first sleep often began shortly after dusk, typically around 8:30 to 9:30 p.m., as nights fell earlier than in summer. Candles and rushlights were expensive and short-lived, and hearths provided limited warmth beyond immediate rooms, making early rest necessary to conserve fuel. In households ranging from rural cottages in Yorkshire to noble estates at Windsor and Coucy, the interlude between first and second sleep offered a chance to tend fires, replenish candles, and perform essential chores before returning to bed. Parish records from Cambridge and York between 1310 and 1330 indicate that servants and household staff adjusted their night routines in accordance with the seasonal onset of darkness, illustrating how labor, domestic management, and environmental constraints intersected to shape sleep, often down to the precise scheduling of individual tasks. Cold temperatures intensified the need for careful scheduling. Stone castles and wooden cottages were poorly insulated, and unheated upper chambers could reach near freezing levels at night. Chronicles from northern Scotland describe families retreating to rooms near central hearths, while other spaces were used sparingly to conserve heat. Manor accounts from Picardy and the 1322 show servants distributing blankets, furs, and bedding to prioritize warmth during the first sleep, with temporary wakefulness used to stoke fires, check animals, and attend to urgent household tasks. In urban settings such as Paris or Rouen, extended nights similarly required nighttime activity for domestic maintenance, security, and communal obligations, with first and second sleep naturally accommodating these duties, and some households even scheduling small personal tasks or reading in candlelight during the interval. Monastic communities were particularly attentive to seasonal variations. Benedictine abbeys, including Cluny and Saint Denis, altered the timing of nocturnal prayers, vigils, and matins to reflect the extended hours of winter darkness. Records indicate that monks sometimes extended their interlude between first and second sleep to include reading, copying manuscripts, or engaging in silent reflection, while maintaining alignment with canonical hours. Summer nights, by contrast, permitted later first sleep and shorter periods of wakefulness due to increased daylight and warmth. These adjustments demonstrate the flexibility of segmented sleep, showing that it was not a rigid practice, but one responsive to environmental conditions, fuel availability, and the practical requirements of daily monastic life. Seasonal considerations also influenced outdoor and ancillary tasks. Winter nights required careful monitoring of livestock, protection of water supplies from freezing, and collection of firewood to maintain hearths through prolonged cold. Stewart accounts from Windsor Castle in 1325 to 1327 document rotations of servants responsible for night patrols, livestock care, and fire maintenance, coordinated with the first and second sleep schedule. Rural households similarly used the night interlude to perform chores that could not be postponed, ensuring that food, fuel, and warmth were sustained until dawn. These routines highlight the interplay between labor, survival, and the temporal structure of sleep, and also suggest why segmented sleep persisted as a practical solution across both peasant and elite environments. By adjusting sleeping hours and nighttime activity to seasonal conditions, medieval Europeans demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of environmental constraints. The segmentation of sleep during long winter nights allowed for conservation of warmth and resources, maintenance of domestic and agricultural labor, and alignment with spiritual or communal obligations. Seasonal variations shaped the rhythm of the night across rural villages, urban centers, and aristocratic estates, reflecting a practical, adaptive approach to both work and rest. Segmented sleep thus emerged as an essential strategy for enduring the harsh realities of winter, balancing human needs with the limitations of architecture, fuel, and natural light, and reinforcing the integration of natural rhythms into everyday life. In medieval Europe, medical understanding of the human body profoundly influenced daily routines, including the pattern of sleep. Physicians, apothecaries, and medical writers drew upon Galenic humoral theory, emphasizing balance among the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile to maintain health. Sleep was not considered merely a passive state, but an active component of humoral regulation, with segmented sleep often recommended to support equilibrium. Documents from the 13th and 14th centuries, including the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum and writings by Henri de Mondeville in France, provide instructions for patients on timing sleep to align with natural bodily rhythms and environmental conditions, reflecting a close intersection of medical theory and daily practice, often intertwined with practical household management. Medical treatises frequently associated the first sleep with the body's need to cool excess heat accumulated during the day. Scholars noted that the early hours of night allowed for the redistribution of humors, calming overactive digestion or tempering irritability. The interlude between first and second sleep, often occurring around midnight, was described as an opportunity for gentle activity that would neither overexert the body nor disturb humoral balance. Physicians suggested short walks in the hall, tending fires, or quiet prayer, noting that prolonged wakefulness or excessive exertion could aggravate imbalance and lead to fever, digestive upset, or melancholy. These instructions were disseminated to both urban and rural households, with some physicians keeping personal notes on the sleeping habits of patients they observed in towns like Paris, Rouen, and London, while others circulated advice through letters, household manuals, and treatises. Medical manuals also detailed individual variations in sleep needs based on age, temperament, and health. Children, particularly those under 12, were encouraged to sleep longer during the first period of rest, while adults with sanguine or choleric temperaments were often advised to rise briefly during the night to prevent overheating of the body or stagnation of humors. Elderly patients, described in accounts from Cambridge and York in the early 1300 seconds, were recommended segmented sleep to counter fatigue, preserve strength, and aid in digestion. Similarly, those recovering from illness or injury were sometimes instructed to avoid extended uninterrupted sleep, as periods of gentle wakefulness were thought to stimulate circulation, relieve tension, and support the healing process. Monastic medical practice reinforced these ideas. Abbey infirmaries, such as those at St. Denis and Cluny, recorded the sleeping schedules of novices and patients, combining canonical hours with humoral guidance. Night waking was often structured to coincide with herbal remedies, warm drinks, or mild exercises designed to support digestion and temper the body's internal balance. Apothecary notes from northern France document nocturnal administration of infusions, such as chamomile or hyssop teas, timed to occur between first and second sleep, illustrating the integration of medical care into routine nightly activity, as well as the careful attention given to both spiritual and physical welfare. Practical advice also addressed environmental factors. Cold, damp chambers were understood to aggravate phlegmatic imbalance, while excessive heat could inflame bile. Records from Scottish tower houses and northern English manors indicate that layering bedding, positioning near hearths, and rotating sleeping arrangements were used to regulate temperature, complementing the body's natural humoral cycles. Nighttime wakefulness provided an opportunity to adjust bedding, stoke fires, or administer small remedies, reflecting a practical application of medical theory to everyday life, and showing that attention to the home environment was integral to maintaining health. Even lay households engaged with these ideas, often following guidance from medical texts and local healers. Noble estates in Picardy and England coordinated servant activity around these periods, ensuring that food, warmth, and basic care supported both rest and humoral balance. Peasant households, while less formalized, adapted similar practices, rising briefly to tend animals, stoke hearths, and maintain comfort, illustrating the widespread influence of medical thought on nocturnal routines and demonstrating how medieval populations integrated empirical observation into daily survival strategies. Through the lens of humoral theory, segmented sleep in medieval Europe emerges as a practice deeply entwined with health and well-being. Night waking was not merely a cultural habit, but a considered strategy to align bodily processes with environmental conditions, spiritual obligations, and domestic necessity. Across monasteries, towns, and rural villages, medical reasoning shaped how people slept, reflecting a deliberate approach to integrating human physiology, seasonal changes, domestic management, and practical household oversight into the rhythm of the night. In medieval Europe, the night was not only a time for rest, but also a period of heightened concern for safety and security. Villages, towns, and castles were all vulnerable to theft, assault, and other forms of crime under the cover of darkness. Records from the 13th and 14th centuries illustrate that segmented sleep, with a first and second sleep separated by a brief period of wakefulness, aligned with practical considerations of vigilance. Inhabitants often rose after first sleep to check locks, stoke fires, and patrol their surroundings, integrating security measures into the natural rhythm of nocturnal activity, while also performing minor household maintenance tasks. Parish and municipal records from London, York, and Rouen between 1,300 and 1,330 detail organized night watches for both urban streets and rural settlements. Watchmen and constables were scheduled to patrol from approximately midnight to the early morning, coinciding with the interlude between first and second sleep. Residents were expected to contribute by maintaining household lighting, ensuring that doors and shutters were secured, and attending to livestock or grain stores. Chronicles from northern England describe villagers taking turns guarding barns, granaries, and wells, suggesting that communal security relied heavily on the nocturnal awareness fostered by two-shift sleep, as well as coordination among households. Castles and fortified manors also incorporated segmented sleep into defense routines. Steward accounts from Windsor Castle and Château de Coucy between 1320 and 1330 indicate that chamber servants and junior staff were routinely assigned to check outer gates, towers, and walls during the night interlude. Guards stationed along battlements often coordinated with household staff, ensuring that alarm signals such as bells or horns could be responded to promptly. Evidence from Scottish tower houses shows that fires were maintained in specific hearths to provide light for internal patrols, while sentries walked between floors and courtyards to monitor for intruders, demonstrating the practical overlap between domestic, defensive responsibilities and the need for constant vigilance. Crime prevention in urban environments also influenced nocturnal schedules. London city ordinances from 1310 to 1320 required that doors be locked at sunset and that lanterns be lit along main streets and market squares. Parish records reveal that residents observed curfews, sometimes rising after first sleep, to ensure compliance or to assist in rounding up stray animals that could attract thieves. Inns, taverns, and marketplaces similarly adapted to the segmented night, with staff tending lights, securing goods, and preparing for early morning activity while patrons rested during the first sleep, highlighting a citywide adaptation to both security and daily routine. The correlation between night waking and vigilance was not limited to practical security. Written accounts from northern France and Flanders suggest that residents perceived the hours after first sleep as especially auspicious for detecting potential threats. Chronicles and diaries describe scenarios in which servants or minor officials discovered fires, water leaks, or trespassers during the interlude, emphasizing the effectiveness of periodic wakefulness. Even in noble households, chamber staff rose to check locks, monitor entrances, and maintain lighting, illustrating that security was integrated into both upper and lower class routines and contributing to overall household stability. Travelers' accounts provide further insight into the relationship between segmented sleep and nighttime vigilance. A visitor to northern England in 1327 noted that inns were quiet for several hours after first sleep, but innkeepers and a few attendants remained active, ensuring that doors were barred and valuables protected. Similarly, records from Paris in the late 14th century report watchmen inspecting city gates during the night, aligning with the natural rise of residents during the interlude. Across both rural and urban contexts, this combination of periodic wakefulness and communal responsibility reinforced safety without requiring constant wakefulness, showing a practical adaptation of human sleep patterns to environmental, social, and domestic demands. The interconnection of sleep, crime prevention, and household management demonstrates how segmented rest was functional as well as habitual. Medieval Europeans did not simply sleep in two phases for personal comfort. Their wakeful periods were coordinated with practical, security-oriented tasks, from tending hearths and livestock to patrolling streets and fortifications. Across towns, villages, and castles, vigilance was woven into the natural rhythm of the night, illustrating a structured and deliberate approach to safety that was inseparable from daily life, labor, domestic organization, and communal responsibility. In late medieval Europe, noble households and courtly life followed highly structured routines, and these schedules had a significant impact on sleeping patterns. Aristocratic estates were large, staffed by dozens of servants, and required meticulous organization to maintain comfort, security, and social appearances. Accounts from Windsor Castle, Château de Coucy, and Château de Vincennes in the 14th century reveal that segmented sleep was integrated into courtly life, not only for practical reasons, but also as a reflection of social hierarchy, ritual, and expectation. First sleep typically occurred after evening repasts, often around 9 to 10 p.m., with a brief period of wakefulness before second sleep, during which various household, social, and ceremonial duties were performed, including minor administrative tasks and quiet reflection. Chamber servants played a central role in this nocturnal routine. Records from Windsor Castle between 1325 and 1330 indicate that attendants were responsible for lighting and maintaining candles, stoking fires, and ensuring the comfort of their masters during the night interlude. Some were assigned to attend to noble children or young pages, while others monitored sleeping quarters for security, distributing blankets or adjusting bedding as necessary. These tasks were synchronized with first and second sleep, highlighting how the segmented night structured labor as much as rest. Monitors or nightwards in French courts performed similar duties at Château de Vincennes, demonstrating that the coordination of personnel during the night was a deliberate practice across Europe and carefully documented in steward accounts. Courtly rituals and social expectations also shaped nocturnal patterns. Evening entertainments, such as music, storytelling, or small gatherings, were often scheduled to end shortly before first sleep, allowing nobles to retire in alignment with household schedules. Historical accounts from Picardy and Normandy describe noble households observing periods of quiet reflection, prayer, or private conversation between first and second sleep. In some cases, correspondences, letters, or bookkeeping were managed during this interlude, particularly in households overseeing multiple estates or with administrative responsibilities in nearby towns. The segmented night thus supported both leisure and duty, as well as facilitated the organization of household priorities without disturbing overall rest. Guests and visiting dignitaries influenced sleep patterns as well. Steward records from Château de Coucy in 1332 to 1335 note that guest chambers were prepared, with staggered arrangements to accommodate arrivals who might wake during the first sleep. Servants were expected to anticipate these movements, relighting candles or providing minimal guidance without disturbing the household, reinforcing the importance of careful planning. In the French court, similar practices ensured that ceremonial activities or private meetings could be conducted in the hours following first sleep, blending practical hospitality with adherence to social decorum and the subtle management of social hierarchies within noble residences. Security remained a constant consideration for noble households. Records from Windsor and Coucy indicate that gates, outer walls, and internal corridors were monitored during the night interlude, often in coordination with servants attending to bedding and comfort. Chamber staff were frequently assigned to check entrances and maintain lighting, balancing household well-being with defensive vigilance. In larger estates, rotating teams of attendants, guards, and stewards ensured continuous observation without requiring extended wakefulness from any individual, demonstrating a sophisticated approach to managing both human labor and security needs within the structure of segmented sleep, while maintaining comfort and efficiency. Medical and humoral theory also influenced noble sleep practices. Physicians and household advisors sometimes recommended brief waking periods to promote digestion, regulate humors, or attend to minor ailments. Records from English and French noble estates describe servants providing warm drinks, adjusting bedding, or administering light treatments during the night interlude, reflecting the integration of medical knowledge into daily routine. The combination of practical care, ritualized behavior, and social expectation illustrates that two-shift sleep was far more than a habit. It was embedded into the functioning of noble life, shaping the rhythm of night throughout the household. Across late medieval courts, segmented sleep served multiple functions. It structured domestic labor, maintained security, supported health, and accommodated social and ceremonial obligations. From the careful attention of chamber servants to the timing of rituals and correspondence, the night was divided into purposeful intervals. This approach ensured that both nobles and their households could maintain comfort, safety, and social propriety in alignment with environmental constraints, architectural limitations, and human circadian patterns, making two-shift sleep a deliberate and essential feature of courtly life, reflecting the intersection of culture, labor, and the practicalities of medieval nighttime living. In medieval Europe, cultural beliefs about the night profoundly shaped patterns of sleep, particularly the segmented first and second sleep. Folklore, superstition, and interpretations of dreams influenced why people arose during the night and how they spent their interlude of wakefulness. Chronicles, local records, and literary sources from the 13th and 14th centuries reveal a consistent awareness of nocturnal activity as a liminal time, when the boundary between the natural and supernatural world was perceived to be thinner. Across villages, towns, and noble households, the hours following first sleep were understood as particularly susceptible to spiritual influence, offering both risk and opportunity for those awake, and shaping behavior with tangible consequences for daily life. Dreams were considered significant, often regarded as messages from God, warnings of danger, or insights into the future. French and English manuscript collections from 1,300 to 1,350, including marginal notes in devotional texts, describe residents consulting household clerks or local clergy to interpret nocturnal visions experienced between first and second sleep. Farmers, artisans, and even urban officials believed that dreams occurring during the night interlude held greater potency than those at other times, and this perception shaped the timing of wakefulness. People sometimes kept candles or small lights burning to record dreams, and written accounts occasionally note that individuals would rise to pray, reflect, or perform symbolic actions prompted by these visions. Superstition also governed nighttime behavior. Villagers and town residents feared spirits, demons, and wandering souls that were believed to roam the night. Chronicles from northern France describe rural households placing charms or protective objects near beds, while English parish records indicate that some families left small offerings for spirits during the night interlude. The belief that malevolent forces were more active between first and second sleep contributed to why many chose to remain partially awake during this period, tending fires, monitoring doors, or engaging in quiet ritual observances to protect themselves and their property, often involving neighbors or family members in cooperative vigilance. Folklore surrounding witches, nocturnal animals, and the witching hour reinforced vigilance at night. Accounts from Picardy and Brittany describe villagers attributing misfortune, crop damage, or livestock illness to creatures active in the hours following first sleep. In response, families incorporated small domestic routines into this period, including checking stables, rekindling hearths, or reciting prayers. Similarly, travelers' diaries from northern England in the early 1300s report inns and manor houses observing quiet wakefulness in anticipation of supernatural threats, demonstrating that superstition was entwined with both practical and cultural understandings of the night. Noble households, while less constrained by immediate danger from animals or misfortune, were not immune to the influence of folklore. French court records from Château de Vincennes and Windsor Castle indicate that chamber servants and attendants were attentive to signs and omens during the night interlude, including unexplained noises or shadows, which were sometimes interpreted according to prevailing superstition. Even aristocrats themselves occasionally consulted dream interpreters or astrologers in the hours after first sleep, particularly during periods of personal or political uncertainty, showing that belief in supernatural influence pervaded multiple social strata, influencing decisions and nighttime routines. Monastic and clerical sources reinforce these perceptions. Abbey chronicles, particularly from Cluny and Saint Denis, note the intersection of spiritual vigilance and nocturnal superstition. While canonical hours structured prayer and study, monks also recorded instances of prophetic dreams or unexplained disturbances during the night interlude, which were interpreted as morally or spiritually significant. These observations influenced lay behavior through sermons, instructional texts, and guidance on domestic piety, embedding folklore and superstition into everyday practice and the rhythm of segmented sleep. Across Europe, the interplay of dreams, superstition, and household vigilance ensured that first and second sleep were not purely biological events, but culturally informed practices. Night waking allowed individuals to respond to perceived spiritual threats, reflect on visions, and perform protective rituals. The widespread documentation of these behaviors in chronicles, legal records, and devotional literature highlights how medieval Europeans negotiated the uncertainties of darkness, combining practical care, spiritual observance, and cultural belief to create a structured nocturnal world. Segmented sleep, in this context, was both a response to environmental conditions and a reflection of the human desire to navigate, interpret, and influence forces that were believed to move unseen in the night, shaping both daily activity and long-term social norms. Daily life and the rhythm of sleep differed considerably between towns, villages, and castles, reflecting the diversity of environments, occupations, and household structures across late medieval Europe. Urban centers such as London, Paris, and Rouen had concentrated populations, bustling streets, and market activity that persisted late into the evening, while rural villages were dispersed, quieter, and more dependent on agricultural schedules and seasonal cycles. These differences shaped how first and second sleep were experienced, with environmental, social, and practical factors all influencing the timing and duration of nocturnal rest, as well as the ways in which households organized their domestic and labor routines to accommodate these rhythms. Town dwellers often faced noise, light, and constant movement, requiring adaptation to intermittent rest. Parish records from London between 1310 and 1325 describe households where artisans, merchants, and minor officials would rise after first sleep to perform late bookkeeping, tend small workshops, or secure goods in shops. Inns and taverns similarly adjusted to segmented sleep patterns, with keepers and a few attendants remaining awake after first sleep to prepare rooms, maintain fires, or serve travelers who arrived at unconventional hours. Street noise, proximity to other dwellings, and the necessity of maintaining business or trade influenced when residents could comfortably return to second sleep, and families often coordinated with neighbors to minimize disturbance during these nocturnal periods. By contrast, rural villagers experienced nights marked by relative quiet and a stronger connection to natural light cycles. Accounts from villages in northern England, Picardy, and Brittany, from 1300 to 1340 show that first sleep often began earlier in the evening, sometimes shortly after sunset, with wakefulness between first and second sleep devoted to tending livestock, stoking hearths, or completing chores that could not wait until dawn. The absence of street lamps, crowded housing, and urban bustle meant that villagers could maintain more consistent patterns of wakefulness, with nocturnal activity closely tied to practical survival rather than social or commercial obligations, and often coordinated across multiple members of extended households. Household size and composition also shaped segmented sleep. Larger estates, whether noble households or wealthy urban merchants' homes, required coordination among numerous servants, children, and apprentices. Steward records from Paris and Rouen between 1320 and 1330 describe rotation schedules during the night interlude to ensure that fires were maintained, animals were fed, and security was upheld without disturbing the rest of principal residents. In smaller rural cottages, fewer occupants meant that household tasks during the night could be managed by a single adult, often rising briefly before returning to bed. This variation demonstrates that segmented sleep was not uniform, but adapted to the scale, function, and social organization of domestic life. Environmental constraints further differentiated urban and rural experiences. Townhouses were frequently adjacent to narrow streets, markets, and workshops, exposing residents to drafts, noise, and uneven heating, which sometimes necessitated waking during the night for comfort or vigilance. In rural areas, insulated by surrounding fields, barns, or outbuildings, inhabitants relied on central hearths for warmth, tending fires, and distributing blankets to maintain comfort through long winter nights. Manor records from northern England and Brittany document careful management of these resources in coordination with first and second sleep, emphasizing the practical integration of domestic management, environmental awareness, and seasonal adaptation. Social and communal factors influence the rhythm of sleep in both contexts. In towns, communal noise, curfews, and municipal regulations required coordinated wakefulness, particularly for watchmen or officials tasked with security. Villages relied on informal cooperation. Neighbors took turns checking livestock, fires, or wells during the night interlude, ensuring collective safety without requiring constant alertness. In both urban and rural environments, the interlude between first and second sleep provided a structured period for managing household duties, maintaining security, and tending practical necessities, while also accommodating human physiological rhythms and seasonal variation in light and temperature. This contrast between urban and rural patterns highlights the adaptability of segmented sleep. Rather than a fixed schedule, first and second sleep were negotiated around environmental conditions, household composition, labor demands, and social obligations. The nocturnal interlude functioned as both a practical and flexible element of daily life, bridging the needs of work, safety, and comfort. Across towns, villages, and estates, medieval Europeans structured their nights to meet the demands of their surroundings, showing that sleep was deeply intertwined with both human organization and the material realities of the medieval world, as well as with social and communal expectations for vigilance and order. Light, heat, and architecture played a decisive role in shaping medieval sleep patterns, demonstrating that segmented rest was as much a response to practical constraints as to culture or physiology. Candles, rushlights, and hearths were costly and limited, restricting illumination to immediate areas and compelling households to organize activity around available light. Manor accounts from northern England and Picardy, between 1,300 and 1,340 record careful rationing of candles and tallow, with servants scheduled to maintain hearths during the interlude between first and second sleep. In urban homes, street lamps were scarce and uneven, so residents relied on interior lighting and staggered activity to maximize safety and comfort during nocturnal hours, often supplementing these measures with reflective objects or mirrors to extend the reach of dim light. Building materials and architectural design further constrained sleep. Stone castles, timber-framed urban houses, and rural cottages all offered varying levels of insulation, influencing when and where residents could rest comfortably. Upper chambers were often cold in winter, prompting families to sleep in lower, warmer rooms near central hearths during first sleep, while temporary wakefulness allowed adjustment of bedding, redistribution of blankets, or stoking of fires. Tower houses in Scotland and northern England demonstrate strategic placement of fireplaces and hearths to provide minimal light and warmth, with nocturnal tasks coordinated around these zones to maintain human comfort and security. Even minor architectural features, such as shuttered windows or thick curtains, played a role in controlling drafts and preserving heat, indicating that domestic design was intimately tied to sleep practices. Climate and seasonal variation reinforced these patterns. Long winter nights, high humidity, and freezing temperatures necessitated careful scheduling of first and second sleep, with household interludes used to tend fires, check on animals, and prepare food or drink for warmth. Medieval diaries and steward accounts record staggered activity to make the most of daylight and heat, with nocturnal wakefulness functioning as both a practical and adaptive strategy. Summer nights, by contrast, allowed for later first sleep and shorter interludes, as daylight extended activity and warmth remained more consistent, permitting extended work or devotional tasks during evenings. Noise and environmental hazards also influenced sleep segmentation. Urban centers were crowded and noisy, with carts, animals, and late-night trades generating disturbances that could interrupt rest. Rural households, while quieter, faced dangers from wildlife or structural vulnerabilities, such as thatched roofs and unreinforced doors. The interlude between first and second sleep provided a structured opportunity to inspect properties, secure animals, and mitigate hazards. Chronicles from northern England and Brittany describe villagers rising to tend fires or check livestock during the night interlude, highlighting the convergence of domestic management, safety, and environmental awareness. Even small technological measures shaped nocturnal habits. Candle placement, types of wicks, and the use of reflective surfaces such as polished metal or small mirrors helped maximize limited light, while hearth engineering optimized warmth distribution. Observations from French and English households suggest that careful management of these resources was essential for maintaining comfort and health, particularly during long nights. In some monastic contexts, movable rushlights and lamps were deliberately placed to illuminate reading or devotional spaces during the nocturnal interlude, allowing monks to perform tasks without overextending limited supplies of fuel. Water and sanitation further contributed to nighttime considerations. Wells, cisterns, and latrines required attention in darkness, particularly during winter or inclement weather. Household and monastic accounts indicate that brief wakefulness between first and second sleep was used to draw water, check drainage, or attend to hygiene needs, demonstrating that practical environmental demands were integrated into the rhythm of segmented sleep. Security, health, and comfort were therefore inseparable from architectural and technological realities, and families often coordinated these tasks with candle tending and warmth distribution to maintain household functionality. Across late medieval Europe, the interplay of architecture, fuel, climate, and technology structured the night. Segmented sleep emerged not merely from custom or physiology, but from the necessity of responding to environmental constraints and resource limitations. The timing, duration, and activities of first and second sleep were carefully calibrated to balance warmth, illumination, safety, and labor. Medieval Europeans adapted to the material realities of their surroundings, demonstrating that nocturnal life was shaped as much by technological and environmental considerations as by culture, belief, or social organization. Awareness of light, heat, and architectural limitations permeated domestic life, guiding sleep, labor, and safety routines in a complex and interconnected nocturnal system. The segmented sleep of medieval Europe left a subtle yet enduring legacy, influencing domestic routines, cultural memory, and understandings of human rest for centuries. While continuous sleep became increasingly normative from the 18th century onward, historical accounts of first and second sleep persisted in literature, diaries, and medical texts, preserving knowledge of a nocturnal rhythm once central to European life. Scholars, writers, and folklorists noted these patterns, often with a mixture of curiosity, nostalgia, and scholarly reflection, highlighting how medieval sleep practices shaped both practical and symbolic conceptions of nighttime and influenced later social and medical thought. Cultural memory of segmented sleep remained vivid in proverbs, folk sayings, and literary references. English and French texts from the 16th and 17th centuries describe first sleep and second sleep in ways that suggest a shared understanding among readers, indicating that these terms and their associated behaviors retained social recognition even as actual practices evolved. Travel narratives, diaries, and letters recount instances of nocturnal wakefulness in rural communities, often describing villagers rising after a first rest to tend fires, check livestock, or engage in prayer, demonstrating the persistence of practical applications of segmented sleep. In urban environments, particularly in the early modern period, references to waking after first sleep occasionally appear in personal and household records, revealing that older rhythms could coexist with emerging patterns of consolidated rest and adaptation to new urban environments. Medical and scientific discourses preserve knowledge of two-phase sleep as well. Early modern physicians, building upon Galenic theory, occasionally reference the benefits of brief nocturnal wakefulness for digestion, humoral balance, and spiritual reflection. Texts from 16th and 17th century European authors continued to discuss the timing and utility of waking during the night, even as continuous sleep became idealized. These writings reveal a continuity of thought, showing that segmented sleep was not simply a historical curiosity, but part of an evolving understanding of human physiology, social practice, and overall health management across different classes and communities. Religious and spiritual practices also carried echoes of segmented sleep into later periods. Monastic chronicles, devotional manuals, and parish records maintained instructions for night prayers, vigils, and nocturnal reflection that mirrored the medieval interlude between first and second sleep. Even as canonical hours were adapted or simplified, the concept of a period of wakefulness at night for spiritual attentiveness persisted in some contexts, particularly in rural or conservative religious communities. This overlap between practical labor, piety, and temporal structuring of the night underscores the intertwined nature of cultural, spiritual, and biological factors in shaping rest and maintaining household order. Anthropologists and historians have noted that contemporary sleep patterns, particularly in pre-industrial or rural communities, can still reflect remnants of two-phase sleep. Field studies suggest that humans naturally adopt segmented rest when environmental, labor, or social conditions favor nocturnal wakefulness, highlighting a latent continuity with medieval practices. Literary historians have also observed that narratives, poetry, and folklore often depict characters rising during the night, consulting dreams, or performing quiet tasks between sleep periods, indicating that medieval conceptions of the night retained imaginative, symbolic, and moral influence well beyond the period itself. Ultimately, the legacy of medieval sleep patterns reveals that human rest is historically and culturally situated. Segmented sleep was a structured response to environmental constraints, household management, social obligations, and spiritual practice. Its traces in literature, medical texts, religious instruction, and cultural memory demonstrate how adaptive strategies can persist symbolically even after they cease to dominate daily life. Understanding this legacy enriches modern perspectives on sleep, reminding us that contemporary notions of uninterrupted rest are historically contingent and that the rhythms of the night have always been shaped by a complex interplay of biology, society, culture, and tradition. Across centuries, the story of medieval sleep highlights human ingenuity in negotiating darkness, labor, and ritual. First and second sleep were not merely historical curiosities, but essential components of a broader temporal logic, one that balanced work, security, spiritual observance, and bodily needs. By examining these patterns, historians gain insight into how ordinary lives were organized around nocturnal rhythms, and how cultural memory can preserve the outlines of a daily practice long after it has faded from common experience and memory.